Triathlon Show 390. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Pieter Rijnders. Pieter is a Belgian duathlon coach, and he has worked with athletes and is working with athletes at the highest level, including top duathletes Arnaud, Dely and Maurine, Ricour. When we recorded the interview, the World Duathlon Championships in Ibiza had not yet taken place, but they have now when I record this intro. So I can confirm that Arnaud finished 4th and Maurine finished 8th. In this interview, we discuss Pieter's perspectives on training and coaching, and we dive deep into general endurance training, but also some specifics about duathlon training. But before we get into the interview, big thanks to our sponsors, Form. The Form Smart Swim Goggles give you real-time feedback in your swim training through a display on the goggle lens. You can see your splits, your average pace, and you can even see stroke rate and heart rate if you use polar heart rate monitors. And all of this will help you execute your swim workouts better and make them more fun and engaging. In the Form app, you also get access to advanced post-swim analysis, and you can build your own custom workouts or choose from a library of workouts and training plans, and your workouts will sync seamlessly to platforms like Training Peaks, Strava, and so on. You can get 15% off the goggles with the code TTS15 on formswim.com/TTS. And thank you to ZEN8. The ZEN8 Indoor Swim Trainer is a unique Dryland Swim Trainer that allows you to improve your technique, power, and swim training consistency. It is a perfect tool to complement your pool and open water swimming, as it allows you to do very specific power and technique work, including working your catch and your core activation, and it makes it easier to stay consistent even when you can't go to the pool. You can try the ZEN8 risk-free for up to 30 days, so if you don't love it, just send it back, and you can get a special TTS bundle including the swim bench and a bunch of ZEN8 training plans and on-demand workouts on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Now, without any further ado, here's my interview with Pieter Rijnders. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Pieter. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you, Michael. I'm very honored to be a guest in this podcast. And I feel a bit small between all these big names that's already featured here. And but I will do my best to share my passion with the listeners. And to have a place between all those great guests with different experts out of many interesting fields. And when athletes ask for a good podcast, I always give them a short list with that triathlon show always on that short list. So I'm really honored to be featured as a guest in the podcast that I listened many episodes of. So,
That's nice to hear. Thank you for that. And can we start with an introduction? Tell us a bit more about yourself, what you're doing, what your background is, and so on.
Okay, with pleasure. So my name is Pieter Rijnders. I live in the north of Belgium, close to the border with the Netherlands. I have 3 kids, and I'm passionate about sports and sports science for all my life. So I went to the University of Leuven in Belgium to have a master's degree in physical education and sports sciences. I work as a part-time anatomy, physiology, and athletics teacher, and I combine this now for around 5.5 years with being part-time self-employed and coach for motivated and ambitious endurance athletes. I try to bundle not only a certain kind of knowledge, but also experience, because in my younger years, I was an athlete myself. First of all, I did long distance running, in which I specialized a bit in cross-country running, because I felt I was the best in it. And I had the honor to represent Belgium a few times in the European Championships cross-country in the elite category. And but I struggled a lot with injuries myself too. And at the age of 32, I started with cycling. I discovered the pleasure of it, and a friend I knew at that time advised me, why not try a duathlon race? Belgium has a certain legacy in duathlon. We have famous duathletes who won the World Championships or European Championships. And I tried a duathlon race. I won the first 4 duathlon races that summer, and including the national championship in the sprint distance. And so in the last part of my career as an athlete, I focused more on duathlon in combination with a little bit of road running too. My most important performances in duathlon were a medal at the European Championships in the elite category, and I one time participated also in Zofingen. That's a bit Hawaii for the duathletes, the Powerman World Championship. And the time I participated there, I was 4th in the elite category. So after I stopped trying to get the best out of myself, I prepared 2 years to study further, to follow a few courses, to prepare all the documents, all the methodologies, to coach people. And I wanted to be very sure that I had enough knowledge to make people better. And that's what I'm doing for the last 5.5 years now. I like doing being a coach and get the best out of people, helping them. And the most famous athletes I coach are 2 world-class duathletes. They both have a professional contract in Belgium, that are Arnaud, Dely and Maurine, Ricour. And besides duathlon, they reach a pretty high level in running too. For example, Arnaud Dely has a personal records of 28 minutes, 20 seconds on the 10K road in Valencia. And Maurine Ricour runs sub 34 minutes on a 10K. So the duathlon at the highest level is often underestimated. And it's a very exciting weekend, because this weekend they both are going to participate in the World Multisport Championships in Ibiza.
And that's sprint distance draft legal duathlon. So it's 5 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers. And they also do the mixed relay, right?
Yes, exactly. I think it's a tendency to make races shorter, for it's more interesting, more spectacular for spectators for television. And a few years ago, the World Championships were in the Olympic format. Also in duathlon, even it is not an Olympic discipline, they called it Olympic distance. That was 10K of running, 40K of cycling, and then 5K of running. But they cut the distance in half, and so it's shorter now, yes.
Yeah. And then when you mentioned, just for the listeners that are not really familiar with duathlon, when you talked about Zofingen and the Powerman before, that's a longer distance and non-drafting element, so more similar to long distance triathlon in a way with the non-drafting element. So it functions similarly to triathlon, but you do 2 runs instead of 1 swim and 1 run.
Yes, correct. In Zofingen, distances are fixed for some years now, and you start with a 10K of running. That is already very challenging with a lot of uphill. It's in Switzerland, so they have mountains there. They can choose for very demanding courses. The cycling is 150 kilometers with a lot of mountains you have to climb. And then the last run that makes it a real challenge is 30 kilometers of running with a lot of off-road and uphill. So it's very demanding.
That's very demanding, yeah, indeed. So let's talk about your, let's say, training philosophy. Can you give an overview of that?
Yeah, my training philosophy comes a bit from out of my own experience as an athlete and bad days or bad periods I had, and the different coaching styles I experienced myself. And I think as a coach, I'm rather a cautious coach, because I think I have a co-responsibility about the physical and mental health of athletes, and I like to take it step by step and start rather cautious, because I don't want my athletes to have injuries or to lead them into overtraining. So when I start to work with an athlete, I will always start very, very easy, because I'm not always aware of what they did before we started the collaboration, and maybe they are slightly overtrained, and you can try to detect that with athletes with blood analysis and with what they mention to you, but it's not always very clear. So when the first period, I plan rather easy, but you see it in the whole approach that I like to apply. So especially also with younger athletes, I think that sometimes you are better slightly undertrained than overtrained, and that's a cautious approach in very much cases, or athletes can lead to a lot of good results and progress. And if you detect on intermediate tests or races that there is progress and everything is going into the right direction, then I often think by myself why I would try to apply extreme methods or hypes when with applying the basic principles and a cautious approach, there is already continuous progress. So it takes sometimes patience and also courage to dare to train easy a lot and to do it for long enough. And you have to convince, in most cases, the athletes to step into this approach. But in some kind of way, I think in the long term, it works out better. But when you see sometimes athletes who are conducting epic workouts week after week, then sometimes they perform very well with it, but you always have to wait and see if they can maintain it for 2 or 3 years, because sometimes after that comes the crash, and then that's not what I want to be the cause of for my athletes, that I go for short-term success. I always try to see the long-term bigger picture. So in my whole coaching philosophy, I see it also as a long-term learning process. As an athlete, my time was rather limited to achieve my top potential. But as a coach, I have the rest of my life to get better, to get smarter, to learn more, to improve more. And so why not try it with a cautious approach first that has less chance for overtraining, injuries, and bad experiences. And after that, after I know athletes a little bit more, after I see that they respond well to the approach, then loosen the reins a bit more, and then step by step, put more on their plate, as to speak.
You said that it takes courage to train easy enough and also long enough sometimes. So with that, I would interpret it as you wouldn't necessarily be afraid to give a certain amount of volume. You would be more cautious with intensity than with volume. Is that correct?
Yes, that is in some kind of way correct, because I see a lot of athletes who are doing intensity-based approaches, but are not getting the results that I think they can. You see a lot of Strava nowadays, but athletes have a network. They know what other athletes are doing. They talk about it. You see the athletes that you coach. Compare sometimes with other athletes of their generation, and you compare the progress. And then I can say, I think after some years, that some athletes who I coach are making more progress than some other athletes who do other approaches. And then sometimes I think that it's because of they are doing intensity too often, that in this kind of way that it's rather counterproductive than that it helps them to achieve continuous progress. I see also athletes that are more injured and overtrained a lot, and that it's unfortunately, for lucky, I must say, it's not the case with the athletes I coach. So I think, for example, Arnaud Dely, I coach him now almost 4 years, and he hadn't had to skip one day of training because of a severe injury. So that's something I am very proud of, because I find that very important. I realized from my own career as an athlete, modest athlete, I must say, but I wasn't the biggest talent, but I tried to get the best out of myself and find satisfaction in improvement when I compared with myself, not with others. But it was not pleasant when you were injured and you were very passionate about your sports, and then when it fell away, then it was as well physical as mental, very hard sometimes to deal with it. And it can have effect on your work or relationships, on study results. So that's also a few reasons why I prefer to do not extreme things or jump on every hype, rather do not too much intensity and keep the training intensity distribution. It is not a goal, but I think it's following automatically from a balanced approach to keep it very in favor of low intensity work.
Can we go into some duathlon specific questions regarding training? So, of course, it might be a bit individual, but some, in addition to the things you already said here with low intensity training and avoiding injury and so on, how would you, for a duathlete, for example, distribute bike and run volume? How would you plan the frequency of workouts? Would you do specific brick workouts or transition training? Some of these questions that are specific to duathlon training would be interesting to get into.
Yes. I must say, duathlon training in itself does not differ that much from other endurance disciplines, and certainly not from the parts that are practiced, being running and cycling. So I coach, besides of duathlon, also runners. But it's the combination of two, aligning everything and ensuring that those two disciplines reinforce each other and do not interfere, that makes it more challenging than monosport, so to speak. It's sometimes scratching my head. I want them to get the best possible level in running and cycling, but you cannot train as a runner and you cannot train as a cyclist. So it's always make a combination and try to combine the best possible key workouts with enough easy work to have a good base. But it's through I think a combination of a balanced ratio between base work and intensity in both running and cycling as well, that I try to help to maximize the athletes both their cycling and running level. And that's an elite duathlete on average, for example, does less volume in each of the sports separately. So less volume in running as an elite runner and less volume in cycling as an elite cyclist. But combined, I think the training hours on a weekly basis will be roughly in between the two. It's more as a runner and it's less as a cyclist, and maybe a bit comparable with most of the triathletes, because triathletes sometimes does triple training days when they conduct one running session, one cycling session, and swimming session. My duathletes do often 2 running sessions and a cycling session on top. So that's 3 sessions a day. And on a lot of days, they do a running session, a cycling session, and a core strength session. So that's also 3 sessions a day. Of course, it depends a bit on the level of the athlete and the work-life balance. But if I'm speaking about the professional duathletes, it's almost every day 2 or 3 sessions. So for the most intensive workouts, the same applies here too. In number, they're undoubtedly a bit fewer than a runner and as a cyclist, but together it will be roughly the same. Because imagine a runner does 2 interval sessions in the heavy domain, then a duathlete will do 1 cycling session and a week and 1 running session. So it's both of the combination of both worlds, and that are some basic principles.
Yeah, that's good. And what about brick workouts or transition work? Is that something that you use?
Yes, sometimes I must say that the more experienced the level, the less brick workouts they do or they need. Because it's not that they have to adapt anymore to the transition from cycling into running, or after the first run cycling. The most important transition is from cycling into running, the second transition, and then most of the important races are decided in the last run. The athletes who can achieve the highest speed there, in most cases, wins the race.
Ik heb dit op het web gevonden voor speed.
Excuse me, the tablet was playing. Brick workouts are most for the unexperienced athletes and who has to get used to the transition and on a neuromuscular basis. And then I often schedule an easy endurance run after a key workout in cycling. So there is some pre-fatigue, and then the running, and then on a gradual basis I enhance or improve the intensity of the workouts. So that can be a cycling workout and a more intensive running session. If there is a structural problem in transition of the athletes ask to do it more, then you can also choose for a multiple format, which implicates that there is a session that with multiple transitions and intervals in running, cycling, most done indoor, if athletes have a treadmill and an indoor cycling trainer. But in Belgium too, there are sports centers which have a cycling track outdoor next to an athletics track, and then you can conduct interval sessions with reps on the athletics track and reps on the cycling track.
So this is a bit of a random question, but I'm interested in that setup with the bike track and athletics track. Are the bikes safe, or do they have to lock them up next to the bike track before they go to the athletics track, or can they actually just put the bike to the side and then go and run, and they can see the bike all the time, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'm talking about Sports Center. I trained myself in my athlete career, and I advise it sometimes to go to the athlete I coach to go to if they live not too far from it. But you can drive with a bike to from the athletics track on a road. It's not off-road, a road to the cyclist track. And if you have someone who accompanies you with the training session, then the bike is safe when you are running on the track. So
yeah, cool. And maybe we can, if you're okay with it, can you give an example training week, maybe from Arnaud or Maurine in their preparation for the World Championships? Just maybe not the taper week, but some like a normal build week, to get an example of what duathlon training at the highest level looks like.
Yes, the last period they had planned a few races. As well, a duathlon race as a road race. So I will explain a week without a race. So
sure.
A typical training week leading up to the most important phase of the season. In March, we had the European Championships, where they both took the silver medal in the individual race. And so a bit before that, there was a week on a training camp in Spain, and most of the typical sessions that were built up during the month before were planned in that week. And the athletes trained each day 2 or 3 times, both a running session and a cycling session. And some of the days they conducted 2 running sessions and a cycling session on top. And the other days it was only running once, cycling once, and sometimes also a core or strength session. The 2 weeks where I'm talking about, where there were 18 and 19 sessions during these 2 consecutive weeks, the training hours were around 30 at 32 hours. That's everything includes also the core and strength work. So that's training at the highest level. If it's now running or triathlon or duathlon, it takes a lot of training, and you have to. I know it's rather a small discipline, but if you are not a talent in endurance sport and you don't have a high level in running, or you cannot push high watts in cycling, then you are not top at the European Championships or World Championships. So it's asks a lot of training too. So when I look at that first week, then it was starting after the travel day with 2 easy sessions. It was a running jog for 50 minutes and 1 cycling session of 2 hours easy. Then the second day, it was a longer cycling session in the hills in Spain from 4 hours. They stayed in the Syncrosfera hotel with an altitude room there. So it was training low, sleeping high.
Where in Spain is this? What part of Spain?
Denia, in a little bit south of Valencia, and on the east coast of Spain. If you see it on a world map, it's the west of Ibiza and Mallorca. Great place for training there. A lot of pro cyclists like Mathieu van der Poel, Remco van Evenepoel, they met them there at the same roads. So it's a bit well known for elite athletes to go there. But the second day, it was 4 hour during easy rides and 1 hour easy running. the third day, we drove up a little bit with a pre-breakfast morning jog of a half an hour. Later in the morning, after breakfast, a few hours, there was a key cycling session with uphill maximal and submaximal sprints, followed by what you can call zone 2 training. And most likely we will talk about this later in this podcast, but I will give some examples now. For Arnaud and Maurine, it was a little bit adjusted, but for Arnaud, it was 6 times 12 minutes with short rests, with alternating cadence. So it was uphill with the point, because if he has to do it on a flat, it are rather high wattages he has to push and reach high speeds. So to keep it safe, it's done, if it's possible, uphill. At home, he mostly prefer to do it on the indoor trainer. So he can also maintain the same intensity level, and don't have to be afraid that he has hit by a car or something, because in Belgium we have very busy traffic and small and not always good roads. So it was a key cycling session, so with first a bit of lactate production and then lactate clearance, you can call it, because zone 2, if you conduct it well, boosts lactate clearance capacity. I will talk later about it. And then it was the third day was completed with the third session. Later that day, they had a power nap after lunch. And then in the late afternoon, they did an easy run, a little bit as active recovery from the cycling session. So it was a third session that day. Then there was a recovery easy day after the third day. We did a cycling key session, and it was an easy ride and an easy run. The run is then a bit faster than a normal recovery run. You can call it just an easy endurance run. Then on the fifth day, there was also an easy run, a strength session, and a longer ride on the bike for 3 hours. And then on Saturday, there was another key session. So planned. First, before breakfast, they did half an hour pre-morning wake-up run. It's a little bit to activate the body, that gives them energy. It's also the feedback I get often. They do on race days, most days, if it's possible, they do also a pre-breakfast morning jog. And the advantage of it is that if you plan a key session or a race later that day, and you start a warming up, you have the feeling that you have already been warmed up. It's mental and physical. It has benefits, but also for the feeling. I think also on days of important workouts or races, that it's a bit stress relieving. So as science has indicated that activity and sports, that it can diminish stress levels. And I think on a day with a lot of stress, go for a little walk or a little jog can help to cope with the stress. So also and when you have a certain level and you do an easy morning jog of 30, 35, 40 minutes, you don't really feel it later today, but it counts in the volume and in the distance of running that you can achieve over a whole week and in the total picture. So I advise it a lot to athletes if they have the level and have the time to do an extra short session this way. But on the fifth day, the key session in cycling was a heated interval, and that's some kind of workout I prefer to apply. And the heated the meaning of it is high intensity decreasing interval. and it implies a series in different intensity zones with increasing intensity but decreasing duration. And the reason that I plan this often is that you can play a lot with the several intensities, the amount of reps, and athletes often give the feedback that they like this kind of training. I see a lot of advantages in it, and I read it in science too, and it fits in the picture how I see training must be tailored to the specific fiber types of athletes and their characteristics and how they, in my opinion, are best stimulated. So after this heated interval session that was conducted uphill, they had some hours later a recovery running session. Then on the last day of the week, there was a long run of about 1 hour and a half, and an easy cycling and an alternative session by choice, and they choose to go for swimming on the 7th day. Then that was an easy day, and then the 8th day, on Monday of the 2nd week, there was a running, cycling, intervals, cycling is not the right word. There was a running interval session, key workout, followed the day after by 2 easy sessions. 2 days after the key workout in running, when we go into the heavy domain, then I always plan 2 days of recovery. And so the training camp continued with, on the same rhythm.
All right, nice. Thank you for that breakdown. So what is the volume there in, if you look at the 7 days, let's say, so a weekly breakdown of how much volume is done on the bike and how much volume is done on the run?
Yeah, that goes for running. It's not that they do it every week, but for running it was more than 130 kilometers. And for I'm not a coach that is a lot of volume oriented, because I look at the periodization and the build-up first, and I plan the sessions that they fit into the whole picture. But sometimes a lot of volume follows out of it, and then it can go up to a few hundreds of kilometers for cycling, and that can be around 300, 400, 500 this period and week. It was more than 500 kilometers, 550 around, to be very concrete. And the run, it was 130, 150 kilometers that week. That was the most heavy week of this build-up.
Yeah, and to summarize, the harder workouts that were done, heavy or severe intensity domain, can you list them again? The bike and the run hard workouts that you did.
To explain them in a
just list them, so we have, so just for me, maybe for the listeners, but at least for me, to calculate how many harder workouts were there in that week, and what were the structure of them? Were they heavy domain or severe domain?
The first week there was only there was only one cycling session in the you can call it above the maximum lactate steady state and the critical speed or power. There are some terminologies that are used to describe this. And in the second week, but it's also because I look at it as a mesocycle. So sometimes when there is a travel day or there was a road race right before the first week, then we have a recovery day more. So the first real hard running session was on the 8th day. That means Monday of the second week. So the first week there was only one very hard cycling session. And the second week there were 2 hard cycling sessions, running sessions, and 1 hard cycling session. So that's
And the running sessions, were the cycling sessions both in the severe domain, and the running, you said at least one was in the heavy domain. How did that split up in which domain they were in?
Yeah, on this phase, actually, they consisted of different domains. I try to I like to combine a lot, and maybe I will explain it later in this podcast. But there are some power duration curves, and there is power duration curve that is famous. There is a lot of science about it, and that's the power duration of the maximum performance you can, for example, of the speed duration in running, that you can the speed or the time you can achieve on a 5K, a 3K, a 1500 meter, a 10K. There is you can compose a speed duration curve, and for cycling with some key tests you can do. You can also compose power duration curve, but I think there are some other important similar curves too. I call it efficiency duration curves, and I like to train them in different ways because I think that enhances the adaptation of training, and I think there are strategies of the body to recruit the different fiber types, and that they play a role in this type of training and adaptation that I try to plan.
So maybe this is a good point to actually discuss that about muscle fiber typology, because we discussed it a little bit over email, that's something that you use in planning the training. So what are your thoughts? How does that play a role in how you prescribe training?
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and I was myself fascinated for a long time about how the body decides to recruit fibers, when it recruits the slow twitch fibers, the type 1 fibers, when the body starts to recruit faster fibers, and the muscle fiber typology and the composition of it, all the literature about it, I try to collect and read, because some of the topics I find very interesting, and I think that some kind of knowledge can have advantages to program training schedules, and because. And let's start with the basics. Everyone who is a little familiar with physiology knows that the body has different muscle fibers at its disposal, and there is much known about their different characteristics, and also a bit about how our body recruits them. Perhaps there is not yet fully scientific consensus about everything, or neither there is 100% evidence, but as a coach you can have a certain scientific baggage, and the mentality of a scientist is not a bad characteristic, but you cannot have constant doubts about everything and questioning every part of training program and scheduling, because otherwise it's impossible to coach. You have to have certain principles that are known and try to translate it into training practice, and sometimes think what I call physiological doing this. So I look at the nature of the muscle fibers and the basic principles, how they are formed and respond, in order to stimulate them in an efficient, tailored way. And I think it challenged them efficiently, and provoke targeted adaptations. When we speak about slow twitch fibers, the type 1 fibers, they have the most oxidative properties. There is no discussion about it. They are thinner, more robust than the faster muscles fibers. They recover faster, can contain more oxidative enzymes, have more capillaries, more mitochondria, are more efficient over time, can burn more fats, and can so spare glycogen. They are better in consuming lactates, and that's thanks to, in part, of different transporters, MCT1 for lactate import instead of MCT4 for lactate export, and also thanks to an LDH isoform whose equilibrium constant favors pyruvate production in the cytosol rather than lactate. Then this intramuscular lactate pyruvate ratio, which is always there in favor by lactate, they can maintain it better. So the name of the slow twitch fiber also is a bit misleading because they can manage a lot of tension and they can produce a lot of energy. Scientific research about elite and world-class athletes in cycling, in duathlon, triathlon, every research I can get my hands on the internet, I am trying to read and process. But when you see at lactate curves of elite athletes, you always see a very long, flat baseline and a very high power or speed that they can reach before their lactate their blood lactate starts to rise. So they have the ability to process a lot of energy or to produce a lot of energy without the body has the need to shift lactate to the bloodstream. They can manage it intramuscular. And that's all, of course, because of a lot of capillaries, because of a lot of mitochondria. So my question for myself was, why not try to maximize that capacity? There is no need to shift or shuttle lactate to the bloodstream. So when I conduct a lactate test, I noticed that all the best performers always reach higher speeds or power with low lactate levels, and that if you train at the lactate levels that are very low, my guess is that the most oxidative fibers are at work at this point. So if you train them at their maximum capacity to deal it intramuscular and not shift a lot to the bloodstream, I think that is a very efficient way to train the most oxidative fibers, mostly type 1 fibers, to improve their ability to deliver work and in over the weeks and cycles to be able to reach higher speeds or higher power with lower blood lactate levels. So that's something that I try to maximize, and the advantage of it is that if you trigger mostly the type 1 fibers, it's also less stressful for the central nervous system. There is less hormonal response because when they demand a lower firing rate of the central nervous systems, there are less catecholamines needed for the body, and it helps to achieve or maintain a training intensity distribution that is in favor of a lot of easy work. The only problem is that for a lot of athletes in the beginning, when you start to work with them, it is rather easy, and regarding RPE and intensity, and they often don't have the confidence or the patience to maintain the easy work. I have a lot to convince it, but if they do, it always is leading to a lot of progress, because if you trigger the type 1 fibers and they recover good, you can shorten the recovery time between sessions, and you can reach a certain point that you can train 3 times a day without feeling anything the day after it. You don't have to do that when you are continuously recruiting faster fibers, because their characteristics don't allow that they recover that fast, and they can become more oxidative, but not that oxidative as the type 1 fibers, and not that efficient as the type 1 fibers. So
can I follow up on one thing there? So this is really interesting. And when you say that you think that where you have the lowest lactate, I think you said when you have the lowest lactate, that's where you recruit the most oxidative fibers, and that's where you want to train. So if you have a lactate curve on an athlete, quite often you will see that it starts going down and then it starts going up again, but it's still at baseline. So would you aim to train at that kind of minimum lactate point, or am I reading too much into that? And how?
Yeah, it's close to the minimum lactate point. It's where the curve is starts to rise. Imagine the most.
Okay, so closer to your LT1, your first.
Yeah, very close to the LT1 and the first inflection point, if there is an inflection point. In many cases there is, and then it makes it a bit easier to determine. But in some cases there isn't an inflection point, and then you can use heart rate and RPE in combination with the lactate of an athlete. But in athletes who have a well-balanced physiology and who I work longer with, I see almost in any case lactate levels around 1.4 to 1.7 millimole, and that's a good, in my opinion, a good spot to draw the upper limit of easy work. And if you train very close to that upper limit, I think the most oxidative fibers are almost all at work right before the body switches to more glycolytic fibers, and that's when the blood stream or the blood lactate increases in the bloodstream. That's point I try in these sessions to avoid, because I want to target fibers that can deal intramuscular with lactate buildup, and they have a lot of capillaries, mitochondria, and probably they are the most type 1 fibers. So you can, if you do stay below this intensity, you are pretty sure that you can almost train on a daily basis at these intensities. Of course, the higher the level of the athlete, the best it is to stay a bit far away from the upper limits of the LT1, because you cannot train every day slightly below the LT1. The more easy workouts, they have a long flat baseline on lactate curves, and there is a lot of playroom below the LT1. So it demands a lot for the elite duathletes and elite runners too, to run around or cycle around the LT1. To give an example, for Arnaud Dely, it's a pace of 3:15 to 3:10 minutes per kilometer, and then he's training at this intensity in a running session. And when he samples lactate, in most cases he is around 1.5. So
that's below 5 minutes per mile for American listeners. I think just below, if I do my math right. That makes a lot of sense. So when in the example training weeks that you talked about before, the zone 2 work, that's where you are going for that kind of LT1 intensity. But when you mention easy run, then they are going basically whatever feels easy on the day. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Of course, I determine several zones, and that's maybe a bit. I wouldn't call it critics, but maybe when I don't find the zone 2 the most suited name, because it looks like there is only one zone below. That's the recovery zone, or the very, very easy zone, and then zone 2 would be a large spectrum, but I think it's rather a small range of intensity. And when I determine my training zones, and I start at the lowest spectrum. It's the 4th zone. So the first zone is the absolute recovery zone, very, very easy. And then for the longer workouts, I have my endurance 1 zone. For the faster endurance workouts, I have the endurance 2 zone. And then right below the LT1, that's the zone 2. I think Inigo San Milan, who invented the zone 2 and is doing... is talking a lot of interesting things about it, and that's I call it the tempo extensive zone, because in my opinion, if you go above it, you come into the more intensive zones. You go closer to threshold, the maximum lactate steady state, and but in elite athletes, it's very close to each other. When I compare lactate curves of elite athletes, it's always that they have very high LT1, and the gap between the LT1 and when they go over 2 millimole is always very close to the maximum lactate steady state. And when you see more recreational athletes, or athletes who are training intensity based, or a lot of thresholds, I notice more bigger gaps between LT1 and LT2, and between 2 and 4 millimole. And I think that is not the best lactate curve you can have to make continuous progress. So, but that's only regarding the type 1 fibers. Bearing in mind the Henneman size principle, that's some principle that's also known in science, which say that the slowest, thinnest muscle fibers are recruited first, and there is a preference of the body to tend to not activate what is not necessary to conserve energy. So I think you can teach the body to become more efficient in doing that. So you can teach the body to use the type 1, at least the most oxidative muscle fibers, as isolated as possible, to be able to sustain this as long as possible, and to maximize it, that you can go to the highest possible intensity before the body begins to shift to additionally recruit faster or more glycolytic fibers. So I think an endurance athlete has a lot of advantage to maximize their ability to recruit the most oxidative fibers, and in an almost isolated way. And I think Inigo San Milan is trying to tell this, and means this with zone 2, because when he's talking about lactate levels, he's also talking about this 1.5, 1.6 millimole. And I believe that when I combine it with some basic physiology and some research, I read that there are some principles that make sense, because besides the Henneman size principle, you have also the orderly cycling principle, and which implies that, and it's research that's indicated this with elite cyclists and runners, for example, that elites, in compared with recreational athletes, are better at switching between muscle fiber groups and motor units to maintain a certain intensity. So parts of a muscle and groups of type 1 fibers can rest while other parts do the work, while more recreational athletes way faster shift to more glycolytic, more dominant fibers if they are not well trained, or they have the bad luck that there are more type 2 dominant types. So they have to be very cautious with the intensity of zone 2 and LT1. But I think that the relative contribution of the maximum potential of those type 1 fibers, in my opinion, is far too little research. There has long been a focus on high intensity interval training, on threshold training, and on training at the power of speed, the maximal aerobics power of speed. And of course, these training forms and intensities certainly fits into a balanced training structure and approach, but there is a certain view and approach in this area. There is, I think, that a structural adjustments that training at a bit lower intensities entail often only take place in the longer term, and that's a bit in contrast to what happens quickly, the adaptation pathways of faster fibers. So in research, it's not that easy to conduct research on lower intensities, because you only see results after months of training. That the body has structural adaptations. So that's
it's unfortunate, but it makes some sense. Nobody wants to do a PhD and take 10 years to complete it by doing 4 2.5-year studies or something like that. So I completely agree. But it's just a dilemma of how academics work and the need to publish, and also just the cost of running studies and recruiting participants and so on. About the muscle fibers still, do you approach training differently if you have an athlete that you feel is more, let's say, fast twitch dominant versus slow twitch dominant? Would you approach them differently?
Yes, I'm more cautious with volume, with predominant type 2 fiber type athletes. At an initial test, I let them conduct submaximal effort 2 to in combination with the first part of the tests, to have a good indication of their capabilities, of their explosive. Of course, you can get it out of an intake conversation too, and on training and performance history. But type 2 predominant athletes has less type 1 fibers, so their capability to maintain the work is rather limited. They are faster depleted in glycogen, and the body shifts faster to their type 2 fibers. And when they do intensity work, they can adapt well to it, but it's way more challenging to avoid injuries and overtraining when you do a lot of intensity and volume in predominant type 2 fiber type athletes. So I plan shorter reps for these athletes, and they has to train the lot easier than the type 1 athletes.
Yep, right. And you mentioned lactate testing. What other testing do you do, or do you do any other testing?
The athletes I work with, they of the highest level, they go also to a university lab for test for no to VO2 and the VCO2 in absolute and relative values, the ventilatory thresholds, and so on. Thanks to their federation, there is a collaboration with the university lab. So I bought myself a portable VO2 device, but unfortunately it doesn't work well. I would not recommend it to other athletes or coaches. I lost quite some money on it. So it was a brand. I don't know if I can mention the name.
You can mention it. Yeah, you can mention it.
No way! Don't buy it.
It's always good. It's like that. This is the kind of thing that people want to hear. Okay, like what are the things that we should not be buying? So
it's like in a career of an athlete, you learn from mistakes. In a career of a coach, you learn also from mistakes, and you can. I get offers from people that work for the company, and a lot of at one time there was a nice discount. I was searching for a device that I could use in the field because I like a lot field testing in real life settings, and I like being on a track and testing and sampling there and coaching. So that's what I did also myself when I was an athlete. I did mostly field tests. So with these new technologies, you have the VO2 Master that's quite portable. You'll see it pass by on famous triathletes like Blumenfeld and so on. But my only thing that was holding me back from buying it was that it doesn't have CO2, the carbon dioxide measurement. But Pnoe has it, VO2 and VCO2, but it's totally not practical to use. It's not reliable. It just doesn't work good. And I had some contacts with other buyers, owners of the device, and I hear the same everywhere. So I try to give some quality to the people I work with and who I ask money. So if they give me money for a test and to know their VO2 max and their oxygen kinetics in a test, and I cannot rely on the results of the device works not well. Then to make a long story short, I never used it on a client or an athlete. I tested it on myself. It was not reliable, and I gave it now to a scientist of the University of Maastricht. Because he was conducting research about every VO2 analyzer that was on the market, as well portable as stationary. And the only company that would not give a device to cooperate in the scientific research was Pnoe. So he placed something on the internet about it. Those were the devices, and in the last sentence there was is a good runner also. The scientist, and it publishes a lot of interesting research about running. Maybe a good guest too for your podcast. It's Bas van Horen. Remember the name? It's very interesting, and he runs fast for a researcher. Yeah, he runs. I think.
I'm taking notes.
Last 10K road race in Holland, it was the national championship. It's from the Netherlands, and he ran 28:40 for a full-time researcher. Yeah, it's a fast guy, and he publishes a lot of interesting research. So, but he's now conducting a research about those oxygen analyzers. And there was in the sentence, Pnoe doesn't collaborate. And I sent him a message. I have a Pnoe device. So I sent it to him, and thanks to this Pnoe device of me, he can it's integrated in the research, and he sent me the results, and it was way the baddest device of all. It doesn't work at all. He said he sent back to me that he wasn't surprised that I had bad experiences with it.
So that's something that you currently cannot do, the portable VO2, but your top athletes go to the lab to do it. But how often do you do, for example, lactate testing? And when you do you do it on the track for running and on the indoor trainer for cycling, or on a hill for cycling? How do you do that?
Yeah, I prefer to on a track for running. Almost every test I do, or I advise some athletes that live more far away, and they have their own lactate device, and I send them a protocol and a form to complete, and then they give me the data, the results, and I process it. But I think I do, to make an estimate, around 200 lactate field tests in a year. So it's on average 4 per week, I think. But I like to do it because I put all the main findings and data in a database on my computer, and when I start to work with an athlete, I always start with initial lactate tests, and 3 to 4 months later, I do another one, so I can compare my approach, and I can see what it has influenced on the lactate curve of the particular athlete. So, and when you do this with dozens, hundreds of athletes, and you compare it with their race performances, especially running is a grateful sport for it, because it's very the race time and averages on 5K, on 10K, half marathon, you can locate it in a lactate curve in the zones you derived from it, and you can see where people perform in your lactate curves, especially when you test them every 3-4 months. And with a lot of athletes, I do it this way because they like to see the progress on black and white. And when there was advice or there were some conclusions of an initial test from, your lactate is way too high at easy intensities, at relative low heart rate, at relative low paces, and they see the second test that everything what we were aiming for is improved. It's very satisfying, and it's also combined, of course, with the performances that improves. But running tests are always on the track in real life settings, and the cycling tests for practical and safety reasons, it's always indoor. But for cycling, the athlete uses his own bike, his own power meter who the athlete is training with, and then I'm speaking about the athletes who don't go to the lab. But the stationary devices there can also you can use your own bike, but the biomechanical pattern that you use is the same in cycling. It's more closed. In running on a treadmill is a lot of more difference compared with running on a track than if you cycle indoor on your own bike with your own pedals and your own shoes and your own there is not that much difference. I think that's why for me indoor cycling tests is not that not a problem. I just put it that way.
One question that I find fascinating, and there is a little bit of research, but not that much, I don't think, is the transfer effects between different disciplines. within multisport like duathlon and triathlon. So what do you think about the transfer effects between cycling and running in the case of duathlon? How big are these effects? How much running improvement can you get by improving your cycling and vice versa?
I think it has a lot of benefits for as well cyclists as well runners to sometimes do the other discipline or sport, because and you see a lot of them already doing it because on the social media platform for athletes and sports people is Strava. And in my region, the region where I live, there is also a very famous cyclist, pro cyclist, Wout van Aert. Sometimes see him ride on the roads in the village I live in. So he's living very close. And what you see on his Strava that is running sometimes in the morning before he later on the day does cycling training. And I think from a cyclist perspective, it's a healthy way to maintain or stimulate the bone density, and maybe it's also that he feels good by it. It's a time efficient way to train sober, to activate the body, like I explained a little bit earlier in this interview. That so. I think a variation is good, not only physical but also.
Do you mean to train fasted when you talk about training in the morning?
It's a time efficient way to train fasted and not too demanding, and I think it activates fat oxidation and gives the body energy. It activates the muscles. It warms the muscles up to a certain amount. And the main session later on the day always feels a little bit better, smoother when you already have done something. So I think there are a lot of benefits for cyclists to integrate sometimes an easy run. The only thing they have to be cautious for is that the injury aspect of running. It's more puts more tension on the connective tissues and the muscles, the tendons. So it's better to do it easy, I think. And for runners, when you compare the hours of training that elite runners do compared to triathletes or cyclists, it's a lot less. I think they can increase their total training duration on a weekly basis by integrating some cycling sessions, and especially the day after a very hard session or a race. I think it's sometimes better to do only one running session and another cycling session to stimulate recovery and to give a little extra physiological stimulus that a training session always is, without the load of an extra running session that's always in some kind of way demanding for the body who is healing and recovering from a hard session the day before or a race the day before. And I also, when I look to myself and years when I switched from athlete to duathlete, my running level wasn't how will I say it? Way more. It wasn't decreased that much. Thanks to the cycling training, but the volume I ran was way less than when I was only a runner. So I think the combination of running with cycling helps to runners to maybe make a further step in their improvement and in their continuous progress without risking too much injuries. And especially for runners who are coming from out of a period of injuries or are sensitive for injuries, I think it can help them a lot, because with my experience from combination of running and cycling training, and from duathlon, being a duathlon athlete and coach, I plan a lot of cycling sessions for runners who are dealing with an injury or had an injury before we started the collaboration. And then I think when they want to improve, and you can only plan easy sessions in running because they are not ready to drive to increase the intensity, but you can apply this more early with cycling interval sessions. So you can stimulate the cardiovascular system to a larger extent or at higher intensities way sooner in the rebuild process when you plan cycling sessions compared to only running sessions.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think also for your typical, let's say, recreational or amateur athletes, adults coming into endurance sports, maybe they already have been training for a year or two or even 3, but 3 years is still not that long a time to be running. Like, it takes a long time for the body to build up resilience to run a lot. And I think a lot of people, they develop their cardiovascular system faster than their structures, their tendons and tissues and bones. So I think a lot of amateur athletes, especially amateur runners, would benefit from running maybe a bit less and be a bit more safe from injuries, because we know that so many amateur runners get injured a lot, and add more cycling instead. So I think, yeah, amateurs listening to this can definitely take some something from that, what you just said. And on that note, if we transition a little bit to talking more specifically about training for amateur athletes, if we have an amateur athlete limited to, say, 7 to 10 hours of training per week, how would you approach that? How would you maximize that time?
Yeah. So the most, that's a large group of athletes that you can situate in this range of time they can spend on training on top of work and family. So that's a very relevant question, I think. A somewhat obvious answer here is that it, of course, depends on the athlete's goal, the type of athletes, certain history, the timing of the periodization. But in most cases, I would say 80 or 85% of the time would be a variation in the intensity range up to the famous zone 2. I would not change this basic principle, because an athlete that is limited in time and has to deal with other stress factors as work and maybe a family sometimes too, or have a lot of responsibilities, I think it's important that the training sessions don't have to be too much extra stress source. So I think I would, in most cases, plan a longer, easy training. That's always one of the cornerstones, I think, in every approach. But and also one time an interval session in the zone 2 range around the LT1, and possibly in combination with a few short stimuli, because I like to combine that type of training a lot with some short bouts after a good warming up. I plan a lot short sub-maximal bouts to stimulate the faster fibers, but not too demanding, to produce some lactate, that the net lactate, blood lactate is elevated, and then do the zone 2 interval. And when I let athletes do this on a track, and I'm there as a coach, and I sample a lot, then I see in the first part of the session lactate levels around 8, 12, 40 millimole. It depends a bit on the athlete. And after the zone 2 interval, they have 1.4, 1.5. So it's cleared in a fast way, and research is also indicating this, that it's the lactate clearance capacity has a correlation with the VO2 kinetics. So if there is a lot of blood flow to the consuming fibers, and you put them at work around their maximum capacity, then there is a lot of lactate clearance, and everything you trigger, you improve in the body. So that you give attention, that grows. So I think, and it's the best of both worlds, a little bit of high intensity. You can call it also sprint interval training. But yeah, I'm an athlete, so we don't in athletics we normally don't talk about HIIT or sprint interval. We do 100-meter reps, 200-meter reps, 300-meter reps, 400-meter reps, or race pace 5K, or some terminology comes a bit from cycling, because there are not so many races in particular distances. So it's not that easy to determine zones in cycling, because you cannot always compare it with a 5K result or a 10K result. But those high intensity bouts, can you give an example of? Yeah. What is it, 5x200, or how long recoveries, or just an example of what it would look like? I will explain a typical session in running, and it's after a very good warming up, 10 minutes of very easy, 4 to 5 minutes a little bit faster, then a few minutes shock. Then I let 8 or 10 minutes around the LT1 to activate the contribution of the type 1 fibers at the fullest, to stimulate blood flow to them, and then to be very good warmed up. And then I plan 5 bouts of 20-25 seconds. That's sub-maximal by feel, like you would race a 400 meter. And it's not all out, but it's one gear below it, 90-95% of your maximum speed. And in most cases, I plan a ratio of 1:3 work-rest ratio. So if they do 20-25 seconds of that sprint interval of submaximal intensity, then I give them 1 minute and a half of easy jog, and then the second bout comes. 3, 4, 5 reps. It's a bit depending on the athlete. It also helps the neuromuscular coordination at higher speeds. And if you elevate your maximum or submaximal speed, then paces around 3K or 5K becomes also easier for the body to conduct and to maintain. And then after the last rep, in most sessions, I plan very short rests, 20-30 seconds, to go right in the zone 2, that the lactate is elevated, and then you start consuming it at the possible highest rate of it. So and then it can be reps of 1 kilometer, reps of 2 kilometer, depending on the periodization. What I plan is that I start with very short reps with short rests, and reps are getting first more in number, and in the second phase they are extending the duration of the reps, and the rest remains the same. So the work-rest ratio changes automatically in favor of more work and less rest. So it can, during a marathon build-up from a recreation athlete, it can start with reps of 3 minutes, up to reps of 20-25 minutes. And at paces for a recreational runner, it can be 4 minutes per kilometer, 5 minutes per kilometer, depending on the level. So that is some kind of workout I would suggest to do it, because it's a combination of the best of both worlds. Besides the long, easy workouts, and then I would advise at maximum one harder session and all the rest easy sessions. And then the harder session can be a threshold session if the athlete wants to do a race where the intensity around threshold is important, or if the athlete is more oriented to do shorter distances, it can be a session at higher intensities around the critical power of speed, or even closer to the power of speed at the VO2 max. So, and then the bouts will be shorter than around the critical speed or around the threshold. It's also here I see some speed power duration curve, that the higher you go to a certain upper limit, the upper limit of the intensity with low lactate levels around LT1, the maximum lactate steady state and the critical speed, and the upper limit of the ability of the body to process oxygen, the VO2 max, that the shorter you come to a certain upper limit, the shorter the bouts or the repetitions are to maintain the efficiency at this intensity. And the further you go away from it, the longer the repetitions can be. First, my periodization, and that's if there are elite athletes of recreational, I plan always short reps close to a certain upper limit, and further in the periodization, I try to a high fractional utilization of that upper limit to extend it. So that's a bit what I have in mind for athletes to structure a whole build-up. And that's what I do with this amateur athlete who is limited to 7 to 10 hours of training. But a lot of it will be easy. One combined session with very high intensity short bouts and zone 2, one longer easy training, and one harder session.
What if they are a duathlete, so they have two disciplines, the bike and the run? Obviously, how would you do that with, getting in the long workout in running and cycling and the different types of sessions that you mentioned there? Would you spread it out over 2 weeks, or how do you work if it's a duathlete versus a runner, let's say?
If it's a recreational duathlete, then there will not be every week a very hard session in as well running as well cycling on his program, because I don't think it's necessary. And most recreational duathletes choose the longer duathlon races because they are more popular. In Belgium, we have the most heavy duathlon race in the world. They call themselves the Hell from Casterly. It's been on national television. It's in our region a very famous race, and you have to run 15 kilometers in the woods. Then you have to mountain bike 125 kilometers with a lot of steep hills. And then the second run is 30 kilometers, and it's in the winter in circumstances that can be a hell. So it's the Hell from Casterly, and a lot of duathletes that I coach have this as a goal, because finishing the Hell is something duathletes want to do at least once. So they have and it's always also the national championship long distance cross duathlon. So, but I don't think the intensity is the most important for this type of duathletes. So I don't plan too much hard sessions. It's a lot of easy work, and so the most weeks are just endurance intensities for as well running as well cycling. A lot of the most volume they can do if it's built up gradually, of course, and a lot of zone 2 work, and only spiced with some short bouts.
Yep, perfect. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you could give 3 pieces of advice to athletes listening to this interview, what would that be?
3 pieces of advice. That is, some things that I already mentioned this interview, and as something that dare to have the patience to try to an easy approach and to do it as long as it takes and long enough, because it will help that your body adapts way better from training sessions, and that training sessions on top of work and life, everything that comes with life and family, that the sports and the sessions are giving you energy and not demanding further energy and giving stress. So I think another advice is go for a consistent and gradual process, and take it step by step, and try to structure your training, and with every 2-3 weeks a little bit more, and draw confidence from little steps and from the feeling that you have, and dare to repeat sessions. If you do a certain session and the week after it is nothing wrong with repeat the session and compare the feeling of the session. And the last advice I would like to give is open your mind. There are so many interesting sources and podcasts like this these days, and that are great to read and listen to, and you can it can help a lot with your own training. Even if you don't want to connect with a coach, then it can help to avoid injuries, overtraining, and avoid bad performances, I think. So a little bit of open mind to read and listen. What the knowledge and information that's all there, but a last remark is be a bit skeptical, because a lot of information too is bullshit on the internet. So go for the good sources with podcasts like that Triathlon show who features experts out of the field, and or not telling things they don't know sure, or they are not confident about. Otherwise, they also say it that it's not sure of 100%. So.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, those are all great tips. And let's move into the rapid fire questions. Starting with, what is your favorite book or resource related to endurance sports?
Some years ago, I would recommend The Science of Winning from Jan Olbrecht. It's a very interesting book. It's a little bit outdated, it's a little bit older now, but still very interesting. Terminology, very interesting things about muscle fibers, about periodization, about different kind of workouts. He is also a Belgian doctor he's a doctor in exercise physiology, and in Belgium he has quite a reputation because he worked with Luc van Lierde, a Hawaii double Hawaii winner, and with a lot of Olympic athletes. He was from Germany, I studied in Germany at the same school of Alois Meder, who made the mathematical model where the Sebastian Weber also based his insight algorithms on, and the concept of Villa Max was introduced by Alois Meder, and Jan Olbrecht is from the same school as Sebastian Weber. I'm not the biggest fan of Villa Max as it is promoted then in the book, but it remains a very interesting book. So a little more recent, there is The Science of Running by Steve Magnus, and I mention it with pleasure because it's a very interesting coach, a running coach who is publishing a lot, and is a wise man with a lot of interesting tweets and thoughts and books, and I think he has a podcast too, and with another guy. And he publishes some books and has a video YouTube channel. But the last years, I must say that I'm rather a fan of collecting scientific articles and publications. I collect as many as I can. I put them on my laptop in maps in several topics, and I print them too. And the articles I didn't read yet, I put them on a big to read list pile. And then when I read them, I put them in a bookcase here in my office. In several maps of topics. So I rather prefer scientific publications now than books.
Yeah. And what is an important habit that you have benefited from athletically, professionally, or personally?
I think it is the tendency or the habit to being systematic, being structured in thinking and working in order to being able to keep a certain overview over longer periods, to know what an athlete has done last year, to make it a process that goes over multiple years and several months, combined with an eye for some kind of detail, because I like to work detailed too in warming up protocols, warm down and cool down protocols. And I like to be a bit structured and methodological. I think that helps to get the best out of yourself.
And finally, who's somebody that you look up to or that has inspired you?
Oh, that's definitely my uncle, the brother of my mother. He was a big idol of mine when I was younger. And I don't say it by coincidence, because he, in 1979, he took the Belgian record on the marathon in 2 hours, 10 minutes and 0 seconds. At that time, it was a world-class performance. And although I am a bit too young to have seen his active running career, I was a very big fan, because he also qualified 2 times for the Olympics in 1976, my birth year, and 1980, Montreal and Moscow. And I heard a lot of stories of him. Of course, he lives now, so it's not that he is dead, but I didn't saw him running. But when there were family meetings, I was always asking questions about his time that he was an elite runner. He ran 27 minutes 48 in 1976. So if I had the talent, I was a very lucky guy. But the family records are very very hard to break. So it's unbelievable what he has achieved, knowing that he started only running at the age of 18 after being a football player. And a few years later, he ran sub 28 at 10K. And he was part of what we call here in Belgium a golden generation of runners. It started with Gaston Rouland, Olympic gold in the steeplechase, world record in the steeplechase at 1964 Olympics. And there was forming a group by a very famous coach. Who coached amongst others Ivo van Damme. The Memorial Van Damme in Brussels as a Diamond League meeting is called after him. He won 2 times silver medal at the 1976 Olympic Games. There's Emil Puttemans was in that group, silver Olympic medalist in 1972, 10,000 meters. There's Karel Lismond, 2 Olympic Games, a medal in marathon. There were so many good runners in Belgium. We had a credible generation, and there was one coach, Mon van den Einde, who was the coach of these athletes, of a lot of these athletes. And so it's so fascinating, the stories that my uncle tells about the way they trained. I will give a few examples if there's still some time. But they performed very hard intervals on an athletics track. They jumped into a car, doors and windows closed. They sat bended on their with their legs flexed. To not recover, to be able to recover, the door went open and they did immediately a new interval. Those strategies, the coach tried it out. They trained in a region with a lot of hills, and they did hill sprints with another athlete on their back and things like this. And every year they went 2-3 times to St. Moritz for training camps, and they trained 3 times a day, a lot of days, only running. And the athletes who have famous athletes go there nowadays. St. Moritz is a very good place for altitude camp. I went, I think 4 or 5 times there. It's very beautiful in Switzerland with the lakes and the mountains. But there is near the village, and the athletics track is a lake of 4 kilometers, around 4.5. And they, with their group, sometimes they chose places around the lake where they started, and then they started to run hard. And when another one catches you, you had to stop. And the training was to be able to run as last runner. Was so this kind of workout they did. And there were fantastic stories about this time, although now he admits it was way too intensive. And later in his career, he was a lot of injured, and he had a very short career. And it was caused by this intense approach of very high volume and a lot of very hard intensity workouts. So, but it's someone I look up to.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And finally, where can people find you and follow you?
They can find me on Instagram. Optimum Performance is the name of the little coaching and testing business I have. And that's optimize your sport performance, reach your personal top. And I have an Instagram account and a Facebook page, but I like Instagram the most. And yeah, that's where people can find me.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Pieter. It's been great to chat. Lots of really cool information and perspectives. So really appreciate it, and hope to do it again another time.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you very much, Michael, for this invitation and opportunity to share some passion.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. You can find the show notes for the episode on scientifictriathlon.com. And I will link to Pieter's Instagram, which is his main platform for coaching and information. So check him out there, message him there if you are interested. If you want to improve your triathlon performance and need some help to achieve your goals, then consider working with a scientific triathlon coach or one of our training plans. We have options for different budgets for athletes of all different levels and no matter the size and type of your goal. We don't have any minimum commitment terms for coaching nor any startup fees. And for the training plans, we have a 100% satisfaction guarantee for plans purchased on the website. And we have an exchange guarantee so that you can exchange your plan for another plan if you purchase through Training Peaks. We also have consultation and customized plan options, so there is something for everybody. Find out more and contact us on scientifictriathlon.com and we can discuss your specific goals and needs and see what's best for you. Finally, big thanks to our sponsors Form, they can find on formswim.com/TTS. Improve your swim training with real-time metrics like pace, stroke rate and heart rate, and advanced post-swim analysis. Use the code TTS15 to get 15% off the Form Smart Swim Goggles. And thank you to ZEN8. Use the ZEN8 Swim Trainer to improve your technique, power, stamina, and swim training consistency. You can try the ZEN8 risk-free for up to 30 days and get a special bundle including the swim trainer and a number of ZEN8 training plans and on-demand workouts on zen8swimtrainer.com/TTS. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.